Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to this conference this evening. When it was in 2012, I was working at that time on gold mining, artisanal gold mining in Peru. At that time, and I received an email from someone who's now a friend, Philippe Forêt, and he told me about something he had in mind that maybe was of interest to me, which was lithium and the extraction of lithium in South America. So at that time, I didn't think too much, but I started looking at it, and little by little, I got interested into the topic because it was to be a big issue. And then we started preparing research projects because, as you know, the academia, you must publish or perish. And to publish, you must have something to say. And to have something to say, you must know something. And so you gotta have research projects. And to have research projects, you need money. So this is the nerve of the war. So we started, and then first, there was not much response. Nobody was thinking very much about lithium. And it is only in 2017 that we finally got, after 3 essays, 3 attempts, that we finally got an SNF, Swiss National Fund for Scientific Research, positive answer. But this was prepared during many years. And the project, that project was called Lithium, the supply chain of lithium, international supply chain. And that project was mainly about South America. The goal was to try to understand what was going on in South America. Meanwhile, the first projects were with, well, there were some Chinese friends, and at some point I didn't exactly understand why. They stopped wanting to cooperate with us, so we just kept with South America. So that was it. We started working on Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, and researching what was going on, both at the local level and then at the national level, and within these 3 countries. That is what they were doing together and what was going on. So that was fascinating, and the more so we advanced, it was a real interest, because we realized that the transition towards a green economy was much more complex than what we thought in the first place. Because, and this is especially for lithium, but also for any metal of the transition or any resource needed for the transition, for the green, so-called green transition, that as usual, there were conflicts at the local level between, for example, indigenous populations and companies that would extract the material or the resource, etc. And then you had economic nationalism in it. And then what are we going to do with this lithium? Is this a new resource for development? And then it became a global issue, or question, no? When the European Union realized that they were late, and China was investing a lot in Latin America, and the US was wandering and trying to get what resource they could. And then we had this second project. It is associated with a third one with the University of St. Gallen, which is a smaller one. And then this was much more about I would say, the global aspect. Maybe you would call it transdisciplinarity was in, and then we had more networks. And of course, these are huge questions now. And what about lithium and the transition? Well, obviously, this is going to be a major topic in the coming years, because at the moment we have no alternative to lithium batteries. And this is, of course, connected with global change, but especially climate change, no? We have to do something, because we will hit the wall soon. That is, it is going to be unsustainable, the way of life we have. And then what's going on? We will replace, I don't know, 10 million or 15 or 30 million cars by electric cars. Does this change the situation? No, because we will need copper, we will need cobalt, nickel, etc., etc. So it is basically replacing an old economy by a new economy, which generates kind of the same problems. So that is what this research project is about, on trying to understand what's going on, and also, well, many issues that will be presented by our guests. And I would like, I'm Marc Ufti, I'm the leader of these projects. I'm a professor here, but what I do is mostly signing the checks and checking from time to time that this goes in the right direction. I would like to introduce Jonas Köppel, who is the mastermind of this project and everything. And he will be the moderator of this session, of this conference. He will introduce the people and maybe stop them when their 5 minutes are done. Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course not the mastermind, and Morgan will also be moderating with me. So Marcus, thank you so much for the introduction. Largely exaggerating. So yes, so as Mark said, we try to frame this conference today as both like this public conference on due diligence to make it about this particular issue, but it's at the same time the final conference of this project, which is kind of a thing you do for once a project finishes. So it's also to celebrate, but also to present some results. So we'll try today to present some preliminary results, a kind of preliminary results, and bring kind of these two aspects together. And so, as Mark said, Green Dealings is a project, but it's really also a network of researchers who have been working on lithium mostly and how it matters at this current moment. So rather than presenting academic papers or a similar kind of products that are usual, we'll present ourselves, I think, more as a network. So which is, I guess, one of the main results of this project, of the Green Dealings project. It's a result that keeps evolving and which will just always stay preliminary, right? So we're presenting preliminary results. So here are the people who, during the last 2 years or so, have been working with us on this project in one way or another. Some have left in the meantime, and others have joined us more recently. Some of them, 7 to be precise, or maybe Manuel, it's maybe going to be 6, will try their best today to give you, like the public who are watching us today, who are with us today, an idea about what we've been working on and how. So our approaches are actually quite diverse, as much as our areas of expertise, and we would like to show people like you some of that diversity today. So for the sake of this presentation, we're going to make teams. We'll create the teams actually out of our group. We'll present our work in a little more playful manner than is maybe usual. So Team Blue will introduce us to the idea of the diligence. Team Yellow will take us to the South American salt flats, and Team Green will think with us about how to better govern the lithium chain. Obviously, in reality, we're just all one big team, right? But let me briefly explain how this is going to work. So our teams will work in a format, will present in a format that's called Pecha Kucha, and we have to thank our funder, SNIS, for not only for generously funding us and paying our salaries, but also because they made us present our project at the launch event in the Pecha Kucha format, and we kind of thought that was quite an interesting idea. It's a bit painful to do because Pecha Kucha presentations, they have in the usual format 20 slides of 20 seconds. They're timed, so which is kind of good because you know that your presentation is exactly going to be 400 seconds long, but it can also lead to somewhat a bit critical situations, a little bit of stress, because the clock is always ticking. But because everyone is exactly the same conditions and everyone knows it, it can actually also be quite funny. So that's a bit what we try to do. So we slightly adapted the format for the purpose of this session. So each presenter will have 5 slides at 1 minute, exactly 1 minute. And after each team, I will just say a couple of words to make sure people are still with me. And yes, then after the last team, the green team, I think it was, Morgan and I will introduce our distinguished expert, the panelists. Yes, so we'll invite them to comment on our presentations, and then we'll have a general discussion in the end. The discussion is not going to be very long because we want to finish after like more or less at, was it at 8? And then, but we can continue the discussions for those who like. There's going to be a dinner, apéro dînatoire at Saveur et Passion, which is basically just next door. So please, if you're hungry or feel like it, or just want to drink something or continue the conversation. Okay. So part 1, which is to introduce the concept or idea of due diligence, will be presented by Morgan and Daniela. Morgan has been part of this from the very beginning, since he wrote with Mark the first proposal, actually, of our previous project. And he's now a postdoc researcher and heads the Department of Global Development and Planning at the University of Asker in Norway. Daniela joined us when we were putting together the proposal for this project, Green Dealings, with which we tried to extend, as Mark said, our focus to Europe a bit. Daniela is a research fellow at the University of Cambridge and has more recently started working as an analyst of strategy at the British battery startup. You see, you can make it from university to industry in a company called Niobolt. Okay, so I'll invite you to the stage and you say when you're ready, Morgan.
Okay, let's see how it goes. I'm the first guinea pig, huh? We've not done this before. Let me get my timer here so I can also see how I'm doing. But thank you, Mark and Jonas. Yeah, okay, I think I'm ready.
Good.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so the story, the climate change story. This is a story that most of us know pretty well. But this story about climate change, it's also connected to other stories about the energy transition, about electric cars, and about batteries, and about raw materials, as Mark presented briefly. Now, why am I talking about stories? Actually, narratives is one of the main approaches that we've used in the project, and I want to briefly illustrate what narratives means in a simple way. So narratives are basically stories about the past, the present, and the future, and I think this is a good illustration of what I mean. The European Green Deal, of course, it's a collection of practices and laws and actions and real things happening in different places. But it's also a kind of a story, right? It tells us a particular story about the future, about what we can expect to see in Europe, for example, windmills and other renewable energy. It gives us an image of the future. It's a story about the future, about a green future for Europe. What's the change after one? Okay, great. This is also connected to other stories This looks again like a story about the future, right? This is a Tesla that I think isn't out yet. But one thing I like about narratives is you can look at all different kinds of materials, and that's what I'm trying to show you here briefly. You can look at policy documents. You can look at news stories. You can even look at marketing materials. You can look at all kinds of things because these are images and ideas that are invading us all the time, right? So they're important things. They shape the way we think about the future, the way we think about the past, and the way we think about the present. So they affect the choices that we make. This particular story, I think for me, at least it calls up, okay, it looks like the future, but it reminds me of stories about the past, maybe some fantasies actually, about a world without limits, without speed limits, without limits to distance, without limits to freedom, without limits to consumption, at least for some. Of course, there are other stories which are less prevalent, but you do find them in the media. Maybe many of the people in this room perhaps have come here because they've heard of these other stories about the materials that we need to make lithium-ion batteries and have this kind of energy transition that is being told to us in these stories. So there are other stories about that often tend to focus on sort of the victims of the energy transition, right? And those are really important stories. If Manuel shows up, we'll know. Well, anyway, we'll learn more about the complexity of these stories further on in the presentation. But there is a story about the victims of this energy transition, which is really important, but it's also about more than victims, which we'll nuance later on. But anyway, these are powerful stories, right? Like I said, they influence the way we think about the world. They influence the way we interact with other people, other regions of the world, other places. And another sort of sub-story, every good story needs a hero, right? And the hero that emerges, at least in the European context, in this discourse on energy transition, is actually Europe itself. Europe, and this is a story, right? You're paying attention. So Europe has proposed to produce basically very green, sustainable batteries in comparison to the competition. And one of the ways they plan to do that is through the idea of due diligence. And this is a slide from Jonas Niederberger in the back, who's recently joined our project. And this is from his work, looking at due diligence and the different policies that have emerged in Europe, mostly throughout the last a little bit over a decade. And there's more and more, you might say, consensus on this idea of due diligence, which Daniela will talk about as well. But it's basically the idea that companies will become, we hope, this is the story, how companies will become more responsible in their conduct and become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. But will it be enough? That's the question we ask. So to finish this five quick minutes, I want to give you two main messages that come out of our work on narratives, actually. I think maybe two messages are that we need a broader diversity of stories in the first place, and maybe to listen to a broader diversity of storytellers or different perspectives, right? Of course, there are different stories, and they're all connected, but I think we need more stories, more perspectives that really render an account of the relationships that actually exist between different places, between different materials, and different people, right? So this energy transition, we think of it as a global thing, or it's something that's happening in one place, or it's global, or it's happening in one place. Actually, if it's global, then it's happening everywhere. It's actually somehow local everywhere, right? So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay.
Let's see how it goes. Okay, so due diligence is one of the most important aspects of the EU battery regulation. And in this graphic, we see in red the risk linked to the sourcing, the processing, and the trading of raw materials, combined with the key areas of due diligence: tracking, the assessment of risks, and the third-party verification. These interact in specific social and environmental and governance frameworks in the orbits, and the circles represent the local, the national, and the global aspects of this. The key idea of this very cool graphic that took me hours is that due diligence policies seek to encourage ethical and sustainable sourcing with a set of tools that need to be implemented in a multidimensional, dynamic, and complex system. So the key question, is this enough to address the ethical and the human aspects of sourcing materials for batteries? In this presentation, I will show you some elements to consider to this question. I did it all right. Okay. So, why is it important to do due diligence? The key aspect is that the mining sector is going to provide huge amount of minerals for the low carbon transition. According to forecast, the demand for minerals is going to increase 4 or 5 times in the next decade or 2 decades. Just as an illustration here, we can see that the transitions to EV will require 6 times more minerals than the conventional cars. So we are talking of millions of cars that will come into market in the next year. So the question is, what kind of social, environmental, and governance issues are emerging from this? So we talk about water uses, biodiversity impacts, pollution, social tensions in the local communities. If unchecked, these activities will place an enormous pressures for the resource-rich countries, and therefore it's important for companies to do a due diligence process properly. So, how is the due diligence implemented? It's required for specific minerals in the regulation: lithium, cobalt, graphite, nickel, tin, tantalum, and tungsten so far. It applies to all economic operations placing batteries in the EU market. And it requires that battery producers assess risks based on information retrieved from the tracking system and the grievance mechanism. So remember those 2 words. The tracking system seeks transparency via the identification of the chain of custody. In other words, the name of the supplier, the location, the transport route, the refining location. So this aims to give transparency, and the blockchain technology is key for this. In terms of the grievance mechanism, it's a system that will help reporting incidents. It's an early warning system that helps companies to prevent negative events. In the due diligence, the different levels of disclosure are here. So we have for member states, to the operators or clients, and the public aspects. The public aspects. So now I'm lost. Okay. So what are the challenges that I would like to talk today? Well, first of all, there's the assumptions. So the due diligence, the tracking system has a very important assumption, is that the chain of custody is enough to provide you the relevant information. What issues do we have here? The tracking system is an extreme reliance on the chain of custody. You need more information in qualitative and quantitative terms, and each company has its own way of establishing this. So we need to think if this tool is good enough. In terms of the grievance mechanism, the huge assumption is that the internal, the operational, and the external mechanisms to report are actually taken into account, and they are incorporated into the reporting and then the due diligence. We know that this might not be the case. That will depend if the people involved have the information, have the mechanisms to report, they feel confident to do it. And the other aspects are the monitoring, the third-party monitoring. So this is a huge assumption, is that those who do this are impartial, they are knowledgeable on all the aspects of the supply chain. And of course, since the company is paid for these verifications, there are conflicts of interest. Sorry, I ran out of time. Okay, give me 1 minute. Okay. No, I didn't finish. Can I finish?
Yes, finish.
Okay.
We'll make an exception.
Okay, thank you. The engagement with resource-rich governments is interesting because there is an assumption that the due diligence is a private-oriented process, mostly. But this is being implemented in resource-rich countries. There has been little engagement. The EU battery has been a top-down approach, mostly. And actually, this kind of a standard, this kind of tracking, this kind of transparency could actually benefit enormously the resource-rich countries in terms of their own legal frameworks. So this is definitely a space that should be debated more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much for good job, I would say. Good job, you two, to introduce. So I think Morgan's and Daniela's introduction really raised like some of the key questions that we've been asking, in particular for this conference, but also in the project. So how lithium-ion batteries are talked about, what questions they raise, where and for whom, and why this matters, and how due diligence for this particular context fits into the picture. And then the whole context that Daniela explained very well. Thank you so much for in which context due diligence emerges as a kind of solution these problems. So, so the next part 2, which will take us to the South American salt flats, was to be presented by Manuel, Melissa, and Walter. But Manuel lost his luggage, like his luggage was taken from him, I think, on his way here. So I think he's recovering that. So I think he won't be with us. He'll join us later. So Melissa and Walter will take us to the South American salt flats. But all of the three have been doing research on lithium with us for years. And the salt flats in the borderlands of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile are places that I think have grown close to their hearts. They have come to care about these places. So Melissa is an anthropologist at the University of Salta, where she is currently finishing her PhD project on community reactions to lithium mining and the questions they raise for justice. And Walter is an environmental engineer working with the same group as Melissa, also doing his PhD, where in which he has been developing methods to calculate the water footprint of lithium in particular. So we're going to have to skip over Manuel's presentation, which was about the kind of industrial policy reactions of Latin American governments, mostly in relation to this lithium boom, the announced lithium booms. So the projects to produce batteries, etc., and the kind of reactions and conflicts this has produced throughout the region. But I guess we'll just skip over it and go straight to the South American salt flats, which I look very much forward to. When you're ready.
Okay, now I'm ready. Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you also for the organizers for make this public conference possible. Well, I only have 5 minutes, so I will get right into the presentation. But probably all of us have heard the term lithium triangle as a metaphor to refer to the places from where lithium is extracted in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. But however, it is not all about lithium in these territories, and after years of fieldwork in Argentina, we realized that the concept of the lithium triangle was never mentioned by local residents, and these territories are home to indigenous, I think it's not...
Yeah, I thought it was wrong, but you're still on slide 1.
Yes, but, okay, but, well, okay. So these territories are home to indigenous and pastoralist communities who do not want to define their territories by a resource, but who are in fact included by mining companies and also by the state in the so-called area of influence of mining projects. I think that the pictures are not...
Yes, no,
I mean, I have like 4 pictures in each slide, and it was prepared to pass...
okay, that's okay, I see. It's 1 slide with 4 pictures?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Well, so in this short presentation, I will try to summarize what it means for local communities to be defined as part of the area of influence of a mining project. Well, so just to get a little context, here should be an image of an indigenous village in the Argentine province of Catamarca, where it is not there, so I will just continue. But like most of the local communities living in the area, they are pastoralists, which means that they move with the livestock depending on the availability of water and also the availability of pasture. These villages are located in remote areas where the access to some rights and services is very limited. For instance, in this community that I was trying to show only has electricity from 6 p.m., that one, from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. at night when a diesel generator starts working. They do not have natural gas either, which makes it extremely difficult to heat homes during the cold winters. And also access to healthcare and to education is also problematic, and local residents have to travel like long distances to see a doctor or to attend high school. That's why local communities feel that their quality of life has not improved much with lithium mining. But being defined as part of the area of influence means that their daily lives are being transformed or disturbed by lithium mining in material and environmental terms. Lithium mining creates new landscapes. Mining companies are all the time opening new roads, building evaporation ponds, also aqueducts, processing plants. And moreover, a process of environmental change has started, and local communities are highly concerned about the impacts on biodiversity and on water resources. So lithium mining is also driving some changes in local livelihoods. We can discuss later where these impacts or effects are perceived as positive or negative. But although traditional activities like pastoralism are still important in the area, some locals are now working for mining companies and have formal jobs. At the moment, lithium coexists, but not without tensions, with pastoralism and also with tourism. There is an activity that many local residents find like more sustainable than lithium mining. And being part of the area of influence also has political effects on local communities, as they now become actors who have to be consulted, but who can also negotiate. And however, we participated in some consultation processes that are organized by the state, but in collaboration with the mining companies. But these consultations are not binding and are not adapted to local forms of discussion and consent. So local participation in decision-making is still very limited in relation to lithium mining. And as a result, the communities feel that the territory that once belonged to them is now property of mining companies. Here is a picture of a consultation process. These political effects are accompanied by processes of social fragmentation, since the interest created around lithium mining and the perceptions of lithium mining are not homogeneous within communities. So faced with all these effects, local communities have developed various strategies to deal with lithium mining and with the vulnerable situation they find themselves in. There are many local residents who are optimistic and support the installation of new mining projects as long as they create well-paid but also permanent jobs. Some others oppose to lithium mining and have contacts or organizations that are contacting them at various levels, so they can show in a way how environmental costs are disproportionate to the benefit that lithium could bring to the region. And in the middle, there are some people, some local people, who believe that the mining sector can still improve living conditions. They try to put pressure to obtain greater benefits, but have developed a kind of a strategic suspicion that allows them to be vigilant about the environmental impacts. So these strategies, I think, are rooted in how local communities imagine the future of their territories, but also how they imagine their role in that future. And these strategies are taking place at a very specific moment in Argentina, in the encounter between the promises of development and the fear of potential environmental degradation. So I will leave it here. Thank you for listening.
Te aviso cuando esté. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Jonas, for introducing me. In my presentation, I will briefly comment on three main factors that contribute to the controversial water consumption in lithium mining in Argentina. It is important to note that lithium mining on salars involves an evaporative process that consumes both natural brine and fresh water. In both cases, the water consumed is evaporated into the atmosphere and does not return to the original catchment area. This is why some stakeholders define lithium mining as a water mining, because it is particularly water intensive. I would like to invite you to look at the pictures that I'm going to show you, which will complement my presentation. The first aspect that makes water consumption in lithium mining a controversial issue is the extremely arid climatic condition that characterize the region where lithium is extracted. Among these climatic conditions are water scarcity, high solar radiation, constant wind, and low relative humidity. These climatic conditions have allowed the landscape to evolve over the thousands of years and have led to the formation of different types of natural ecosystems, some of which you can see in the slide. High altitude deserts, grassland, wetlands, and of course salt flats or salars, which are the large deposits of minerals such as lithium. However, beyond the limited availability of water, it is sufficient for the normal functioning of the ecosystem and the different ways of life in the region. The second aspect that makes water consumption in lithium mining a controversial issue is the presence of different stakeholders in the region, mining companies and local communities, both of which use not only water, but also the land for different purposes. While mining companies use water has a key input for the lithium production, local communities depend on water for their productive activities such as agriculture and pastoralism, as well as for human consumption. In this context, lithium mining implies a competition for the use of and access to water resources. This situation has led to the development of some socio-environmental conflicts. In these conflicts, water plays a predominant role, but at the same time, these conflicts are linked to aspects of human rights and the distribution of both economic benefits and environmental costs. The third aspect is the presence of multiple perspectives and understanding of the meaning of water. On the next slide, I would like to share an excerpt from a local resident on this issue. This is a clear concern expressed here about what lithium mining could potentially mean for the existence of salt flats. It is important to note that local communities do not exploit the salt flats, but they are concerned about the potential change that lithium mining could bring for these natural areas. This concern is rooted in the way they understand and they relate it to their territories. Meanwhile, mining companies and the government see the salt flat as vast deposit of lithium and other minerals. The same goes for the fresh water available in the area, which is used in the lithium mining production. While mining companies and the government argue that this is not fit for human consumption, local communities have been using it for centuries. The question now is how we can overcome this controversial situation, which involves different stakeholders and perspectives, and move forward. The starting point is clear. It's necessary to generate data and information that can contribute to the analysis. In this regard, mining companies contribute by producing reports that include water consumption data. However, due to their technical content, these documents are often difficult for local communities and the civil society to understand it. Moreover, these reports focus solely on providing quantitative data on water consumption without a contextualizing of the results of this data in this particular environment. The controversy over water consumption requires an integrative analysis that considers both scientific and local knowledge. And that's it. Thank you.
I see that you've been bending the rules and sneaking more slides in here than were allowed, but I think it was totally worth it because of the nice pictures. So yeah, we've learned, I think, some key lessons or questions that are raised by Melissa and Walter in this case about the people who are living around the salt flats and what they think about the industry taking a hold in their territories, and also how different actors or corporate and state actors engage with these communities. And then finally, Walter has introduced us to the controversy around water and offered us some ideas in terms of how we can maybe better, what's needed for better dealing with this, addressing these issues. So our third and last part, which is about how to better govern the lithium battery chain, will be presented by Diego Martin. So they have been crucial in carrying out the Green Dealings project, in which, in particular, when it comes to engaging stakeholders outside of academia. So originally trained in geography, Diego has been working on the mining industry for many years, being interested in particular in sustainable industry practices and standards. So he's been closely collaborating with Martin at the University of San Martin, also Martin in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And Martin is kind of a heterodox economist by training and directs the Research Center for the Transformation, CENIT, at the University San Martin. He's been working also for years on the socio-technical issues related to lithium mining and industrialization in Latin America. So I'll leave you the floor and good luck. You're the last.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jonas. Thank you for being here. Yes, I'm ready. We can go on. So today I'm presenting results of a Delphi survey that we conducted in 2022 about sustainability and justice challenges related with lithium mining. We have a lot of information. The report has 160 pages. We expect to publish it soon. So today I'm presenting some key messages out of it. And the first one is that lithium mining faces several and relevant, very significant sustainability challenges, according to the opinion of the panel. In 67%, they all agreed there are strong sustainability challenges that must be addressed. So then we also asked the panel what they think should be done. If we should continue under a business as usual scenario, or if we should actually stop for a minute and do something about it. And in the next slide, we will see that 77% of the panel said that measures need to be taken. So we can see it here. And that 77% of the panel said that those measures should be taken at the expense of slowing down the pace of lithium mining, or actually suspending the activity. Only 23% said that sustainability issues need to be addressed, but without interfering with mining. And it was surprising that in that 57%, the industry also ranked at first the issue of slowing down the pace of expansion of lithium. So we see that the panel in this survey is telling us very clear messages. We have sustainability challenges that need to be addressed, and we have to do something about it. We cannot continue as usual. Then we also asked the panel which are the main sustainability problems. We asked them to rank them, and when next slide comes, we will see that environmental challenges were the leading one, the most pressing ones, followed by social. So it is kind of what my previous colleagues have been showing. The problem of impact on the water balance is the key issue for all the stakeholders participating there, followed by impact on biodiversity, then the social, then we have economic issues and institutional ones. And in the next two slides, I want to give you a very brief spotlight on how priorities differ among the different stakeholders, especially between those coming from lithium-demanding countries, like Europe mostly, which was our focus, and from lithium-rich countries, specifically from Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, that hold 53% of global lithium resources. So we were making this breakdown. When next slide comes, I will show you some differences in the perceptions. So the blue dots are from the opinions of lithium-rich countries, and the orange ones, those from lithium-demanding countries. So if we look at this blue square that we have on the left side of the graph, we see that in the priorities, both representatives agree on some visions, on prioritizing options A and B. A is about increasing state investments for information, and B is about multi-stakeholder cooperation. But if we look at F and G, we see that lithium-demanding countries, they prioritize regulatory changes in mining countries and in lithium importing countries for compliance with environmental standards. But if we look at the blue dots, we see that it is not a priority for lithium-rich countries. So this tells us something about what regulation can do and the different perceptions whether regulation is the priority instrument to address environmental challenges or not. And in this last slide, I address very briefly the issue of justice, and we see again in the, on the left side of the graph that lithium-rich countries are saying a just value chain requires first, option A, which is community participation in economic benefits, and second, a transfer of capacities, let's say, work on the added value of the commodity, not just export the commodity, but add value to it. When we look at the answers from lithium-demanding countries, they first prioritize the issue of involving local communities in defining the terms under which lithium is conducted, which was not at all prioritized by lithium-rich countries. So these are just some insights that are available in the report, which will be published in English in December, and that I think can inform the priorities of the bi-regional cooperation and also the application of due diligence requirements between Europe and South America. So I'll now leave Martin, who will also work about that.
Thank you very much. In its communication on a new agenda for the relation between European Union and Latin America, the European Commission made reference to many of the challenges that Diego just pointed out, saying that it will build strategic partnerships with Latin American countries, contributing to the economic development in a sustainable manner and building new value chains. So the question is, as Daniela pointed out, are the negotiated dealings between the European Union and Latin America effective to address the sustainability and justice challenges that we've seen in our previous presentations? Water, relations with community, technological capabilities, biodiversity. I think to answer this question, we have to consider two huge asymmetries between the two regions. The first one is of a political nature. We know the European Union has a strategy for energy transition for critical minerals, but there is no such a thing in Latin America, not even among lithium triangle countries. There is no common position in South America about these topics. The second asymmetry is of a development nature. This is pretty evident when we see social, economic, digitalization, infrastructure indicators. So this is why I will focus more on the European Union policy tools to address sustainability and justice challenges in South America. And I chose, for time reasons, two policy tools. The first one is the Global Gateway. Well, this is under construction, it's a new animal, we don't know much about it, but in essence, it is the Team Europe and all the financial institutions putting money for many things, but essentially in the view of the European Union to catalyze private investment into strategic sectors for the European Union. So it is kind of de-risking strategy for private investment. The second tool is what Daniela mentioned before, the European Battery Regulation. It is a domestic, regional instrument, but it has external implications. It has a due diligence chapter, which aims at guaranteeing that firms are able to identify, to prevent and mitigate risk in the supply chain. So the question now is, are these policy tools adequate? And I think there are two main shortcomings. The first shortcoming is that I think these tools are not tailored to address the specific challenges that my fellow colleagues presented before. So lithium presents very specific challenges which are totally different from other mining activities. And I think these instruments, first, are not tailored to address these challenges. And the second one, there are some topics that remain uncovered. And specifically the question of water, which is very specific, as Walter mentioned before, I think remained basically uncovered. The second limitation, I think, is that the strategy, as Daniela mentioned before, is very focused on responsibility of private firms. It adopts a risk-based strategy. So you have to identify, you have to prevent risk, you design your own plan, and we will have someone certifying that. But what is lacking, I think, it's a capability building strategy. Not only, but specifically to local governments and governments in charge of monitoring and guaranteeing that the activity of firms respect sustainability standards and comply with some minimal justice requirements. So I think that the action and the negotiation between the European and Latin American countries should focus on those two issues: adapt the tools and build new capabilities in stakeholders of the value chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking up with this challenge. I think you all did exceptionally well. Even finishing ahead of time, I think that's really... okay, so I think, yes, so in the end, this is kind of what part of our research questions too, that Diego and Martin raised in the end. So how the concerns raised around lithium mining differ between Europe and South America, and what kind of common concerns different interests could gather, and what is needed kind of to achieve more sustainable outcomes for the governance of the lithium battery chain. So we will now invite the panelists to join us, and I will introduce you while I invite you to sit at the table. So we have Victoria Reich with us, who is a policy advisor on resource policies and mineral supply chains at Germanwatch. So she's recently co-published recommendations for responsible lithium extraction in dialogue with the German automotive industry. She holds a master's degree in international and conflict studies, and she's worked on extractivism and civil society's operational space in Chile. Gavin Bridge is professor of economic geography at Durham University. And, his research focuses on the political economy of energy and natural resources. So he's interested in the spatial and temporal dynamics of extractive industries, such as oil, gas, and critical materials, etc., and the way geo-economic competition and climate change are reconfiguring global production networks and supply chains. Third, we have with us Carolina Ferreira, who is a consultant on lithium and critical raw materials at the Inter-American Development Bank. She has previously worked in both international and multilateral organizations and public agencies in Chile, where she has directed the lithium office at the Ministry of Mining, among other things. She was also the team leader of the Responsible Lithium Partnership with GIZ, which is a mineral supply chain responsibility project in the Salar de Atacama, funded mostly by the German automotive industry, which is the main reason we are very happy that she's here with us today. And fourth, and finally, Clovis Freire is an economic affairs officer at the Division of Technology and Logistics of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, here in Geneva. He's an economist and computer engineer specialized in the economics of innovation and technological change. So this is going to be about industrializations, as we say, he's really the expert for that. So his current work supports the use of science, technology, and innovation for structural transformation and the achievement of sustainable development goals. We're gonna invite you to briefly comment, also in 5 minutes, or how much time you are willing to take, to briefly comment on our presentations. Yes, I just put up the general question of the event today, again, to remind us of the kind of a red thread through all of this. Thank you so much.
We start.
Who wants to start? We can start maybe from the left to the right.
Is that me? Okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you to Jonas and colleagues for the invitation to be on the panel this evening. I'll get right into it. We've been invited to be a little skeptical, a little critical, to kind of challenge the notion of due diligence. And of course, this is a bit of a conundrum, because what do we want? Do we want companies not to do due diligence? So I think the way to kind of get into this is to say what's at work here is really about the politics of traceability and the politics of green global governance, or if you like, the politics of eco-modernization. So there's a bigger set of concerns here that we can use to think about some of the possibilities and limits of due diligence as embedded in the EU battery regulation. So the politics of traceability really relate to the way that efforts to reduce harm and harms from production are taking place within a liberal market framework. And once you look at it from that point of view, they can be challenged for the limitations the way that they align broadly with a liberal market framework, particularly the way that they then fail to challenge systemic features of that market framework. Things like the distribution of power, for example. So the way that due diligence works to reaffirm existing distributions of power rather than shift them. So what this helps us think about then as a sort of a provocation is the way that rearranging production networks around social and environmental values, which is what the battery regulation ostensibly does, doesn't necessarily make them any less exploitative. And so I think this is where Daniela's observation about is it enough is the right question to be asking. So I think one place that we see that, and it came through quite nicely in Walter's presentation, around the observation from the field of companies becoming owners of the house, is really the way that in the due diligence framework of the battery regulation, we're getting a misnaming of the demands of local communities as being about narrowly environmental values or environmental criteria. So with that as a kind of a bit of a preface, let me say a few more positive things. So what is due diligence? Due diligence is quite interesting, I think, conceptually, because it's ultimately an expression of a relational perspective to see commodities like batteries or various products as situated across multiple geographies. I'm a geographer by training, so I like to get the geography word in there whenever I can. But basically to see that batteries are constructed through a set of relationships with others and with other places. So what this does is it brings to the fore questions of responsibility, questions of extension of responsibility across space, responsibility to others. In other words, the distant is implicated in the here. So folding into the EU actions and practices that occur outside of the EU. And there's lots of interesting work on this in the academic field around the politics of certification, for example, and labelling. But I think what's interesting about the due diligence in the EU battery regulation is that this is more than eco-labelling and certification, which would harness the power of consumer choice in the marketplace. Because what the regulation is about, it's a regulation. It's about what is required of a battery for it to qualify for market access. So it's a unilateral action-forcing measure by the EU, and it imposes an obligation of due diligence on those who put batteries into the European market to identify, to prevent and address a set of social and environmental risks. And along with that, it lays down a set of extended producer responsibilities around requirements for battery take-back, for example. It also specifies things like recycled content, so 16% cobalt by 2030, for example. And it sets CO2 thresholds in the power that's taken to produce a battery. And what it does is it packages up all those social and environmental values into something called a battery passport, which is a digital record system, effectively. So what you've got here then in the regulation and the passport is a kind of knowledge fix, to use the words of a former colleague of mine, Sally Eden. And when you see it as a kind of knowledge fix, what you've got here really is due diligence as a response to a perceived knowledge gap. So it's quite interesting conceptually as a knowledge gap. There's lots of literatures about that. One, for example, is the idea of commodity fetishism, comes straight out of Marx, and ideas of alienation. But I think those are interesting, but they perhaps miss the mark here, because it's not only about fetishism, it's actually about the active inscription. It's about the inscription of qualities, the qualities of a good battery. And this is where I think Morgan's point at the beginning about storytelling is absolutely spot on. And it's this storytelling about what constitutes a good battery. And by extension, storytelling about Europe's imagination of itself and its place in the world. Now, Daniela laid out for us a set of specific challenges around due diligence, and particularly the idea of including the relationship between what's effectively an inter-corporate system of due diligence and how that intersects or articulates with state regulation. So I don't disagree with any of those things. I just would like in closing to raise a couple of sort of points of a different register, if you like. And those are really about knowledge, about the politics of knowledge. So what knowledge counts, whose knowledge counts. So there's a set of kind of specific, quite narrow concerns we could point to about limits of the due diligence. So that would be what's excluded. So there's some exclusions about the size of firm. So it doesn't apply to firms that have a turnover of less than 40 million euros, for example. It doesn't apply to all minerals. It's a specified range of minerals. It doesn't apply to all risks. It's a specified list of risks. So you could carry on in this vein, what's included and what's excluded. I think perhaps what's interesting here is it doesn't include the sort of things that Diego just referred to around the idea of value added as part of a key part of justice. Not only kind of test specifying environmental and social consequences, but actually the value added associated with these production chains. But perhaps more importantly, there aren't any thresholds when it comes to risks associated with due diligence. So there's a threshold for CO2 content, there's a threshold for recycled content, but there's no specified threshold when it comes to due diligence. I think there's a couple more larger issues at work here that we could think of as exclusions from due diligence that we might want to think about as creating potential there for creating a different way of thinking about the politics of knowledge. And one is around civil society. So the battery regulation as a knowledge fix basically works around, and it defines the problem as one of transparency rather than participation. So it doesn't include, for example, facilities for participation of local communities. And it also doesn't include, it's effectively an intercorporate network of regulation between firms in the battery sector and then an auditing sector as well. And it provides that information to the public, but it's not where the public is invited in to participate in scrutiny of that chain. And the final point would be around the kind of technological and commercial trajectories that the battery regulation puts in place. And the way that in due diligence and in the framework is very little about lithium intensity or about battery size. So what it's allowing effectively is a technological trajectory that's set by the commercial interests that are in place at the moment within the sector. And there's no end of work that points to really the impossibility of that vision at a world scale. Both around raw material demands, but also around the contribution of electricity that would be required of various national electricity networks to keep powering up those batteries. So in my mind is some work that's been done in the US context. It's a very specific context, but the work is really good, by the Climate and Community Project led by Thea Riofrancos, which identifies that if you were to replace the whole of the US automobile fleet with electric vehicles 1-for-1, you would end up using about half the US electricity supply to maintain that fleet. And what that work does, I think, is it shows very neatly, by working from sites of extraction, how those technological trajectories need to shift and how questions about lithium intensity and battery size are a key part of addressing that. And they're not currently integrated within the EU battery regulation or indeed within due diligence. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks also from my side for the invitation and for presenting the results. And yeah, I try not to repeat things you already mentioned, but I also wanted to start with the critique on due diligence and due diligence laws. And I think it is crucial to understand the pitfalls and shortcomings and also to evade unintended consequences, but we should never take the conclusion out of it that it is the wrong approach. And we have to be aware that due diligence laws is quite a young thing also if we compare it to trade relations, global production networks, and so on. So of course we cannot do everything right at the moment. And for example, the German due diligence law, the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz in German, it just entered into force this year, and we have to revise it after some time. And also everything you said about the battery regulation, on EU level, they are now working on a more like the corporate social due diligence directive, which addresses also a lot of critique already that was mentioned in other laws that are not there yet. So I think the twisting point is that we need legally binding instruments that have strong provisions to enable access to justice, which are not already there everywhere, but I mean, we can make that better. And all those national and regional laws, of course, don't exclude the necessity for multilateral negotiations. And I just want to remind that parallel to to this week and this conference that we are having here. There are the negotiations for a UN binding treaty on business and human rights going on, I guess, somewhere over there. Since 2014, and they are chaired by Ecuador, also this group of friends of the chair, somehow like this. It's mostly from countries of the global south, and I think the EU, to become a credible actor in this field, has to establish an active mandate in the negotiations, which it doesn't have at the moment. And I think this brings us also a bit to Martin's critique, like, do the approaches we have really address the issue? And I think they do somehow, but we have also to be part of those negotiations and take those concerns seriously. In my introduction, Jonas said that we as German Watch are part of this multi-stakeholder initiative with the automotive sector, and there are like OEMs like Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, but also suppliers, Bosch, for example, all the big names, and BASF, most of you know, I guess. And the aim is to improve measures or to develop measures that improve the human rights situation in their supply chains. And we see that many companies lack the knowledge to address risks further down the supply chains, which is lithium extraction. And maybe some, I guess, also lack the motivation or look for excuses. And so recently we developed these recommendations that companies like OEMs, like Mercedes-Benz, for example, should ask their suppliers that they should ask lithium extracting companies to follow. And I think there's a lot of critique also of this approach, I would say, but it is a step also to understand what would be necessary for good lithium extraction, if we can call it like this. And at this point, I also invite you to read the study that Diego presented when it comes out, because I think he could present only very little. And I guess NGOs, or what I understood today in the morning, that NGOs answered a bit differently from government representatives. So regulatory approaches are important, and also that communities participate in how mining should be done. Yes. So, okay, I will jump some points looking at the time that I also only have 5 minutes. I think, of course, I think a lot of critique of due diligence is because it has been voluntary for a long time. So we take some conclusions from the voluntary effects it had. And we see also in our sector dialogue that all the measures are voluntary, of course. And there is one project that actually is quite concrete, which is a grievance mechanism that we also heard from Daniela. And like some companies are just withdrawing now, saying that they concentrate on their own one and so on. And this grievance mechanism was a joint measure. And we know that joint measures are the most effective one when it comes to N-tier risks. So I think this is very frustrating. And this is why we need those binding regulations. Last but not least, due diligence, of course, cannot address all issues of sustainability and justice, because it doesn't address demand-side solutions that you just named, size of cars and so on. And we just have to reduce our demand, implement other solutions like new mobility concepts, size of cars, and so on. And companies and also states in that laws don't ask if we have to change our business models, for example, how we structure our supply chains, what type of cars do we produce, and only if we reach that, we can have a broader and responsible green transition.
Oh, good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. I really learned quite a lot. Thank you very much for inviting Ankita to be here. I would like to take the invitation of Morgan to have new narratives on that topic. And I would like to thought experiment. If, let's suppose that all that Daniela present and all challenges were addressed, and we have the best due diligence policy in the world, that we can say that is poster child of a green policy, a policy instrument. Would that solve the issues that we see that were shown by Melissa and Walter, well, that show the situation of those places. And I want to go beyond those places, those countries, you know, and then beyond Latin America, countries that are dependent on commodities. I would say would not change the situation of them. You know, commodity dependence is a very prevalent condition. Out of 195 countries that are members of UNCTAD, 101 are commodity dependent, and 95 of them are developing countries, so call them commodity dependent developing countries, 95 of them. It is a big number. You know, it's 61% of small island developed countries, 75% of least developed countries, 81% of landlocked developing countries are commodity dependent countries. So they are vulnerable to the price changes. They have a very volatile exports and revenues from exports. So they have problems with that macroeconomic policy, political issues related to that, all because of that commodity dependence. To give you an idea, we have made a study in the Commodity and Development Report 2021. And we try to see what is the probability of commodity-dependent countries get out of commodity dependence. The study found that it would take an average commodity-dependent country 190 years to reduce by half the difference of how much it exports of commodity in terms of total export to the amount of a country that is non-commodity dependent. It's not to reach the same level of commodities in the export back of a non-commodity dependence, just to reduce by half the distance. So basically, it's a commodity dependence trap, that situation. So the point is, let's suppose we have the best due diligence. Would that solve the problem of these countries? I would say no. So these countries that are commodity dependent, they face a challenge now. They may be dependent on one more commodity now. So they have a choice, as the choices that people make, right? The stories that. And the choice, I think, are clear on the presentation of Diego, yeah? Because the choice one is to continue status quo. Countries just rely on raw materials, exporting raw minerals, making benefiting very little from that, and continuing that situation. Even if they done with the best environmental sustainability, we take care of water, let's say we have human rights done, we do all of that, doesn't change the reality of the country, right? The second choice is what Martin was mentioning, is going for, and also mentioned by others here, that value addition, diversification within the value chain and outside of the value chain. So use that resource as an opportunity to get out of the commodity dependence. That is beyond the community, it's something for the country as a whole to take care of it. So in this narrative is expanding beyond the communities, really think about the country. Because we know that when a country rely on exports of commodities, that creates whole problems with the macroeconomic situation of the country. Exchange rates tend to overvalue, and then it becomes very expensive to produce in the country. So it's easier to import than to produce in the country, so you don't diversify, and so on and so on. So the second choice is to go for value addition, diversification within and outside of the value chain. So I would say that the problem with a regulation like that is to create the false sense that we are addressing the problem. That we are addressing the problem of sustainability and just transition by having that. And putting a lot of effort without thinking that the big problem is not to bring sustainability on the current value chains. The issue is to transform these supply chains, these value chains, by making these countries participate in many other steps of those value chains. So I think we will stop here. Thank you.
Well, congratulations to the team for the project. I think that is a useful tool to addressing lithium production challenge, and also to know more about the possibilities and limits of the due diligence policy for battery. Thank you for inviting me. As Jonas said, I'm here most of my because of my experience at the Salar de Atacama with a project related with supply chain responsibility. And one of the team members said that 70% of the panel believes that lithium mining is focusing on sustainability challenge. Environmental challenge leads and then followed by social and economical ones. So I'm going to give some short comments about the situation related with those results. So first of all, related with the environmental challenges, that yes, that's true. So water loss and impacts on biodiversity are priority for all of them. In Lithium Triangle, water scarcity it's already occurring, and there is a general concern about the sustainability in lithium production. All actors are acting in their own way to improve the situation. For example, communities are strengthening their knowledge and creating new structure to monitoring the situation of the salar. On the other hand, government are creating strategies that put in the discussion in the center of the discussion the environmental challenge, and also mining companies are making their own efforts, trying to change their productions with using less water, and also some of them are giving some news about desalinization process, the Salar de Atacama at least. So yeah, but in that point there is a consistent needed related with more information with the role of the government, what happened there, what happened with the control of the environmental and the water and the situation there. So there is a negative perception about their capabilities, and that is a fact. So on the other hand, what happens with net zero or carbon neutrality on lithium mining? It seems it's not a big concern in the result. So, on the other hand, related with economical sustainability, to promote the development of production and technological capabilities in mining, it's something that it seems that government of the whole region are asking for. Government are on this pathway. Today, Latin American countries, they don't longer want to be just producers of minerals. They want to add value. For example, Chile did that with the modification of the Albemarle contract first in 2016, adding a clause related with this topic, and there this was replicated in the SQM contract. So it's a reality. And yeah, on the other side, economical also sustainability, multi-stakeholder approach or participation, it's in general opinion, add value. So yeah, I'm happy with that because those processes are what we want. But as I say in the morning in our workshop, they require time. They need to generate trust, and time for the community is not the same time for the industry. So there are different perception of times. Also, well, some unforeseen events may occur, and you always have the risk of a judicialization process. So yeah, unquick results are not are difficult. So yeah, I'm happy because this was a result of the project. But yeah, there are not really there have also challenge. So it's not that easy. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comment. I mean, there's quite a lot of diversity, I think, in terms of the positions that you took. Is there something, do you want to react to, someone wants to, yes, you want to start, Victoria?
Yeah, one very short reaction to what you said about value creation. And I totally agree that we have also to add value addition and so on, because the commodity dependence won't finish. But we don't have to decide either or. Like, we can do both things, and value creation and addition shouldn't legitimize more exploitation or uncontrolled exploitation. Just to.
So what's the priority, or what's the which goal? How to deal with that?
No, yeah, if I can respond, I think it's really a question of the narratives, you know, is what I was saying. The risk is that you think that that's enough. And maybe the other narrative is not coming up that strong, you know. So I think I totally agree. Due diligence should be part of it. It's what Gavin say. Should I now say we shouldn't have due diligence? Of course not. We should have due diligence. But if you create a battery passport, and this is the main policy that you have to create sustainability and just transition, well, it's not enough to create just transition. So you have to have another narrative, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you. I agree with that. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask him like a general question, maybe for the panel. People can raise whatever issues they want. But actually, Gavin, I liked your point about, I think you mentioned the word thresholds. There's certain thresholds for how much CO2 you can use, and you can measure CO2 use, for example. You could measure something like a water footprint, which is something Walter has worked on. So you could quantify, how much water is consumed in the extraction of lithium, for example. But I'm not sure that would even solve the problem either, because there are also other things you can't quantify, right? And then where would you set the threshold anyway? I mean, for example, in the extraction of cobalt, we hear that child labor is used. So how, do you set a threshold? There's about 10%, 10% of the workers can be children or something. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, there's certain thresholds where it's like, it just can't happen, right? So, and then there are other issues where you just can't quantify it either. I mean, what about development trajectories and things, which are quite qualitative, that a future that is desirable in South America, for example, or around the South Flats. Can you measure? Well, they got 50% of the future they wanted. I mean, their dreams were fulfilled at 49%. So
we have economists and economic geographers, luckily, on the panel.
Yeah, so please, maybe you can respond a bit to that. And the different people can. Yeah.
Well, just briefly, I mean, you've nicely illustrated the point I was trying to make there by suggesting that the way that those due diligence elements are written is around reducing and mitigating risk. So that can involve things like probabilities. The probability that there is involved in this chain the following is X or Y. But the point I was trying to get to is that in many of these things, we would imagine that there are some universals, that the threshold of zero tolerance for various things. Also, the way that those assessments of risk rely on forms of expert knowledge that are within the auditing and verification community. And so they do allow some possibility for kind of ratcheting that up over time. But I think one of the weaknesses of trying to capture that risk is it doesn't have those kinds of thresholds in that are there for CO2 and for recycled content.
Thank you. Are there other panel members who would like to respond to that?
If I would react to it, I see the point that, of course, would be at some point would be interesting to address other elements, water, this and that. But I also see the point of it. The excellent is the enemy of the good in this place. Yeah. So what is feasible? How to start? Maybe you start somewhere, and then at some point you add other elements. So in terms of due diligence, I think there are ways to work through this to make it better than the situation today, let's say. So it's a step ahead. So in that sense, I think it's really to think what we start with, and then how to move.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of what enables that is for that information to be scrutinized, made public, to be challenged. Yes. There is, as I understand it, there is a mechanism by which, though, that the reporting on due diligence is put into the public realm. So there is a report for each company that does its due diligence is made public in a slimmed down form. But that's rather different to putting it into a forum for public scrutiny and challenge. And I think that's where that's one way in which things that don't have a threshold character to them can be made quite effective, is by involving greater range of publics in their scrutiny.
Right. Yeah, of course, I think as part of this process is also involve and build the capacity in developing countries where that has to be done, right? So a lot of building capacity, opportunities for learning, so it's more than add value. It's really transforming. When I was talking about transformation, it's really to transform the situation on developing countries that are the source of that, and they should be part of that, the discussion. Yes.
I was wondering how the company as the principal actor of due diligence fits into this picture. What kind of responsibility one can give, also from, speaking from practice, many of you, I think, of having worked with companies who try to implement due diligence, how much responsibility can one actually put on companies, and what are the limitations to that? Or maybe, states are the principal actors, not companies anymore.
Yeah, okay, I try with an answer. I mean, it's also something, I don't think due diligence shifts all the responsibility. I mean, I guess many of you know the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and there we have the different pillars, and there's the state responsibility to protect, and the companies or private responsibility to respect, if I quoted it right. So it's still like two parallel things going on. And of course, like companies, the big thing in due diligence is also how much do I know? Like, do I know that I'm contributing? And the more I know, the more responsible I am. And also, how much leverage do I have to change it? And this is also when I mentioned how do I organize my supply chain? So the longer and the more complicated my supply chain gets or becomes, it's easier to say, I didn't know, I cannot influence. And this is what we see, I would say, with the big OEMs. They say, oh, it's so complicated, I can never reach further down the supply chain. Yeah, so actually, I thought this was part of my answer. I think
Yeah, clearly, if I may, clearly, you cannot stop on the company. The company has has its role, but of course, is just part of it. So again, I think that what would be nice was to have a bigger view of the problem on all actors involved, and the narrative say we will start here. And we are involving first now the companies and with the due diligence, but we will move to other things. So that would be a better narrative for that. But with already a vision where we want to reach. But for sure, there will be challenge for the company, how far it will go into the supply chain and so on, the capacities in the countries to do that, the relations between the companies and the accreditation companies. So all of that has to be sorted out, for sure.
Yeah, so also what happened with the government in that case? I mean, yeah, the companies are responsible, but what happened, I'm thinking about, I don't know, maybe human rights things. So what happened with the government, with the regulation? What are they doing? Are they doing something? Are they putting efforts on that? So yeah, it's just a question.
Thank you. So I think we can conclude that there's a general consensus that due diligence is maybe not enough. It's a good step. And asking companies alone to be diligent maybe is not enough. Maybe other actors also need to be diligent. And I agree with your point, Clovis, about especially the risk of presenting this as the solution, right? Okay, maybe it's a step, but let's take a step further. But what do you think about the question actually that came up in our Delphi study, which is around, should we slow down? I guess I don't know, should we stop extracting lithium? Should we slow down? Should we keep going? Do we have time to slow down? Is the clock ticking? The clock ticking? Okay. 5 minutes.
Anyone would like to?
I mean, I start.
Few minutes
I think we already answered the question a bit in saying, yeah, we have to change demand side issues and make smaller cars and so on. And I think from an environmental point of view and also human right to a clean and safe environment, how is it? It's a new human right, unfortunately. Yeah, every gram lithium that stays in the brine and in the rock is good if it stays there. But of course, we have to also address the climate change issue and reach a net zero industry. So it like take out as little lithium as we have and also just change our way of living. I have a lot of ideas if you we can talk about it afterwards.
If I may, I think it's the change way of living. I think is a key element that you bring here. All these estimates is some forecast in terms of number of cars that we have to replace by 2030, 40, 2050. Well, using cars is one way to mobility. There are other ways to mobility, public transportation, bicycles, many other ways to do that. So I believe that we should continue going for these cleaner energy sources, and they will require those minerals. The batteries, they will require that, but maybe not in the quantity that we are forecasting, because we are forecasting replace all the fleet. And even if we continue using cars, there are other alternatives like biofuels in countries that are not using crops that are, edible crops for it. You have Brazil with biofuels with sugarcane in places that are not used for other things. And you can also think about, you are not replacing only cars, we are replacing jobs of people that makes the cars and the cars that how they are made today. The way that you make a car today, you have all the supply chains of parts and components that will disappear if you. So you have to think about also this labor issue, the problem, what these people will do, right? So maybe a future where you also will continue to have cars with engines that are similar that we have today, but don't burn fossil fuels and burn biofuels will be another thing. So the problem is bigger. I think we should continue. Of course, we should continue with the move towards a cleaner energy, but perhaps the supposition that it will replace all cars, maybe we have to revise that.
Yeah, so sounds like all we need to do is speed up reducing car dependence so we can slow down the climate extractivism. I think the challenge, of course, is seeing these things in isolation. So we're getting rapid convergence here around a rapid breakout of agreement that we should see these things as being connected in some way. And I think that's exactly right. And the kind of thing that due diligence does is it does make those connections, right? That's what it's doing, is creating this geography of responsibility. But I think as a thought experiment, it might be interesting to think of it, what happens if that responsibility flows the other way around? So if you said to lithium, cobalt extractive communities that your responsibility is to ensure those materials are embedded in materials that have long life, that have low battery size, that contribute to reducing car dependency. So, it's a thought experiment, stay with me. But the point is that we're seeing that interdependence one way, that it's the responsibility of consuming countries to ensure that there is a reduction in the environmental footprint of extraction. And what we're suggesting here is that there are limits to that way of thinking. And the response to the limits is to say there's all these other things. So if you use a similar mode of connecting, like a due diligence process, and you run it from the other end, that's what you would see. What you would see is the nature of the technological and commercial trajectories in which EVs and others are being rolled out, that are shaping that trajectory, that are producing the forward demand curve for lithium, are a consequence of those trajectories. And the due diligence would be to ensure that lithium doesn't get locked up into that, that it moves you in a different direction, that it seeks out alternatives to that.
So you could even imagine, right? Here's your thought experiment. Imagine a country that says, you can have my lithium, but use it responsibly.
Exactly that.
That's an excellent idea. You imagine the country to decide to which country to sell, you have to prove that you are producing batteries that consume less of that mineral. Yeah, I think and maybe also go through other ways. It's for countries that to sell. We can go to the thought experiment. Continue with the thought experiment that not only that you are asking the countries to use less of this mineral in the future, but that the countries that are consuming that material also support your country to diversify your economy. So be willing to buy the things that you don't produce now, but you produce in the future. So it has to go really both ways. Yeah, that was very interesting.
And there are other sectors where we see this, the responsibility of countries that produce nuclear materials, for example, not to proliferate those materials. The increasing requirement, not complete by any means, but the increasing requirement on fossil fuel purveyors to be responsible for their scope 3 emissions that come from the combustion of those materials. So they have some responsibility for how those materials are used. Right? That's the beginning of that process. So so it is a thought experiment, but there are examples where you can see that is starting to have traction in other areas.
Can I ask a question? What happened when this imaginary country is China?
That wants to buy it?
Yeah. What do you think about it?
Yes, as a big buyer country, right? As one of the most the bigger importer of commodities. Yeah, we have to think how to deal with those things. Yes.
Shall we take some questions from the audience? Does anyone have any comments or questions?
And otherwise, there is there's going to be apéro in Saveur et Passion. We're not that many, so we're going to fit easily in there, and there's going to be enough food for everyone. So we also have to leave the room quite fast because of security reasons or something. So we can just go there as a group, I propose, for everyone who feels like joining us, and we can continue there, I suggest. Thank you very much for our distinguished panelists. Also to Isabel for all the help she provided us for the organization of these 2 days. And to Jonas for his help in organizing all of this. And to everyone for coming. Thank you so much.